Welcome everybody in to another edition of 401 Conversations. I'm Mike Neely with Equity 401k Consultants, joined as always by my partner in crime, my sidekick, Mr. Thad Letzer from Nova 401k Associates. Thad, how we doing today?
Terrific, Mike. How you doing?
Well, it is a Tuesday in Southern California. The weather is mild. I don't think there's much room to complain, and I don't think anybody would want to listen to that anyway.
Why start now?
Well, Thad, it's good to be back again for another podcast, another session of our now long-running 401 Conversations podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And today, I think we're going to dive into a good topic. I think, of course, I'm kind of biased. I think all the topics that we dive into here are good, but this one in particular, I think will benefit those folks who have not filed their corporate taxes yet, or their taxes in general. And with that being said, let's dive into this quick topic here. So in 2022, we were on the heels of coming out of a global pandemic, and businesses started to get back to growth again. Things started to look a bit like normal. And so there is probably a higher tax liability in 2022 for most small businesses here in Southern California from those revenues. And I would imagine there are a lot of business owners, professionals like doctors, lawyers, folks like that haven't filed their taxes yet and have a looming tax bill and are still trying to figure out ways to offset that. And if that's the case, Thad, I think we might have a solution for those folks. And that solution is the cash balance plan. So let's talk a little bit about cash balance today, Thad. What is a cash balance plan and how does it work?
Well, cash balance plans are defined benefit plans or a variation thereof that work in lieu of or in tandem with, most commonly the latter than the former, a defined contribution strategy, right? So for the business owner that already has a 401k profit sharing, and they're already maxing out the available contributions on a tax favored basis provided by the defined contribution plan, meaning they're fully funding their profit sharing plan typically, right? I've gotten all the tax mitigation I can from that strategy. I need more. That's when a cash balance conversation may be appropriate, because a cash balance plan is going to avail to the business owner or the plan sponsor tax deductible business contributions on top of what they're putting in to the 401k profit sharing. And so, that's become a pretty attractive strategy. What is this? Early May, we're still designing cash balance plans for 2022, the 2022 tax year and plan year. So, you're able to do that. You can establish and fund a cash balance strategy all the way up until your tax filing deadline. So it's not too late to, think about that kind of solution if you're worried about your tax liability for last year.
Yeah. And, I also think, we've done these in years past where we set up a 401k plan for the prior year. And obviously there's no employee contributions, right? Because that year's already passed. Mm-hmm. But we could still make a profit sharing contribution.
Absolutely.
And that's worked out, especially for the entrepreneur, the solopreneurs out there that are just an individual business owner, and they made a lot of money and they're looking for ways to mitigate the prior year. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, a solo 401k makes sense because now you can still fund it. You can still, following your tax advisor's calculations, be able to fund that thing. And if let's just say you're bumping into the limits on that, right? So you're hitting that top end. You can't put any more in, but you've still got a tax liability and money that you can still put away, cash balance plan can come into play and make sense for those folks. Now, I know this might get into the weeds a little bit. So in that scenario, we're talking about the solopreneur, right? There's no employees. However, let's say we're talking about the mom and pop veterinary practice, right? We know out of COVID, and this is a great example because out of COVID, a lot of people adopted animals during that time, so they weren't alone. Well, you and I, as faithful dog owners, know the medical bills that come along down the road with having a pet. And so maybe in 2022, they saw an explosion in business because, there's more pet owners out there now and they need help with their cats, their dogs, and those sort of things.
That's a good example.
Right? But here's where things can kind of get tricky, right? Is you want to have a good ideal setup for this mom and pop veterinary office, right? Meaning we want to make sure that there is a good balance in the age ranges of, let's say, the front desk staff, the vet techs, and then the doctors, right?
Yeah.
Owners of that practice.
Yeah, the employee demographic is critical to the success of a cash balance strategy.
Right, because if you don't have that, right, where let's say you have some older employees that are working for you, that can make the strategy kind of wonky, right? From an actuarial perspective.
Yeah, it can turn the funding formula kind of upside down, where I'm giving larger contributions to my older non-owner employees than I would ordinarily otherwise have to.
So the bottom line with this is not only, do we want to make sure that we have all our calculations correct and everything done from a tax savings perspective to make sure that we can help you save, but we also need to make sure that the employee demographics will match to make sure that this is a working, viable solution.
Well, Mike, here's an easy cheat towards that goal, right? I mean, I mentioned a minute ago that cash balance strategies are considerable for the small business that is already maxing out their 401k profit sharing plan. So they're already putting the max they can in the profit sharing. If I'm using my profit sharing bucket in my retirement plan, if I'm using new comparability as the profit sharing allocation method, cash balance is really, not to understate it, but I mean, cash balance is like new comp on steroids. So if you're using new comparability as your profit sharing allocation and that's working well, you're really going to dig cash balance, okay? Because that already tells me that the demographic is right, because new comp likes the same demographic as cash balance.
Right.
But oftentimes, and then just real quick, oftentimes what we're seeing though is, plan sponsors are not even using their profit sharing. And then when we get into the plan document, it looks like they're using a pro rata or, some other formula that doesn't fit well with the cash balance solution.
So I want to take a step back.
Yeah.
Because I think what you're saying obviously is true, from that idea of using that kind of as a cheat, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for a lot of plan sponsors that you and I talk to, they don't know the difference between new comp
Sure.
and pro rata and what any of that means. So let's take a step back. Let's describe what new comparability is versus pro rata. Obviously, it is a way and a formulation of how you do profit sharing, but why don't you dive into that for our listeners that don't know the lingo necessarily that we understand.
Just without getting too into the weeds, profit sharing plans can be allocated, can be designed in a variety of ways, right? So that if at the end of the year, the business owner has a $50,000 tax liability, they can send a check to the feds for a tax payment, or they can write that check to the plan as a tax deductible business expense. Okay, great. Who gets how much of that 50K? You can give it so that the owner is going to give himself or herself a 15% contribution, 15% of pay. Pro rata just means everybody gets 15%. Okay. I haven't met the business owner yet that likes that approach. There are other available formulas to use for a profit sharing allocation. They can be, contributed to the plan on the basis of higher income earners get a larger piece of that. Older employees get a larger piece of that. I can skew the way the contributions are allocated in a variety of ways. New comparability is a allocation approach that uses both age and compensation, the higher of both, as an approach that tends to benefit my business owners over the non-business owner demographic. Okay. So without getting too deep in the weeds, and it's a little more actuarial in its approach than a pro rata or an age weighted or what have you. But it typically comes with really good outcomes for the business owner if the employee demographic is good. And so again, if the employee demographic works for new comp, it's going to work for cash balance.
Right. And again, so I want to kind of step back and say, here's what we know so far in this discussion. So cash balance plans are a defined benefit plan that allow you to upsize your retirement contributions along with what you're already doing, right? So you're going to do this in conjunction with what you're already doing as a business owner, or
in addition to.
Yeah. Right. The way that we look at this, we have to look at it from not only the way that it's going to help save you tax money, which is a great benefit and what we want for you as the business owner, because we're trying to create a total win outcome for everybody involved, right? We want your business to thrive, and we also want to create security for your employees. And so this is a win-win. You get the tax benefits and the business pays less in taxes, saving more ultimately for your retirement, but you're also helping your employees save for retirement by incentivizing them with these different matches and these different options. So we know that part. But then from stepping from the tax savings, we have to step into the other part, which is the employee demographic, to make sure it works. And what we're saying now is if you're using a specific type of calculation for your profit share already, and in this case, new comparability, you're probably going to be a great candidate for a cash balance plan and getting that to work in your favor because you're already doing something that goes along those lines for the demographics, correct?
Mike, I'm guessing your office could help any small business owner take a quick look at that. The one caveat I would offer, though, is for as terrific as that sounds, wow, great, more tax mitigation. I need it. Show me how. Cash balance plans are not like profit sharing plans in that they're discretionary every year, right? A profit sharing plan, I make the contribution, I don't. It's big, it's little, it's whatever within IRS limits. Cash balance strategies, by contrast, come with an annual funding requirement. So, for finding you a great tax deduction this year, guess what? You got to make that same contribution-ish next year, the year after, right? So these plans are meant to be established with some sense of permanence, not as a tax scheme to, benefit 1 year of good income or revenue.
Right. And I think that's an important caveat.
Yeah, it's critical.
Because like you said, it seems like it's a short-term solution to a problem today, right? Which is mitigating tax liability. But you have to remember, this is not a defined contribution plan. This is a defined benefit plan.
Right.
And there is an idea of permanence here in that this needs to be a long-term solution that is set up to help solve and mitigate these other issues over the long term, not just today. And let's dive into that a little bit, because I think it's important to understand why you don't want to just set one up short term. So let's say I set this up for my practice, I fund it for 1 year, but then all of a sudden next year, profits ain't so good, business ain't so good, which does happen from time to time, or 2 or 3 years out, business kind of slows down, where there's been talk of recession for the last year now, but we all know that the economy and businesses go in cycles. So what happens in that instance of underfunding, a particular strategy like a cash balance plan?
Well, there's a couple of ways to kind of approach that scenario, but to your direct question about underfunding, right? I mean, if I design the plan with $100,000 contribution and I lay up short this year for revenue purposes, I can only meet 50% of that obligation, and I can only fund at 50K. The plan could be deemed underfunded for that year, which would result in me having to make a larger than normal contribution in the following year to get my plan up to a properly funded status.
Right.
Sometimes that's great because maybe the next year is good and I could use more tax mitigation than just a $100,000 contribution, right? I mean, now I have to make a larger contribution to get myself to a properly funded status. Making that larger contribution actually helps me that next year from a tax mitigation standpoint. So, it's not always a bad outcome when I'm underfunded. But the plan can also, if there are legitimate business reasons, the economy's changed, my industry has shifted due to regulation or for whatever reason, there's legitimate business need, I can amend the formula in my plan. I mean, I can amend that down to reduce my ongoing future funding obligations. I guess ultimately I could always terminate the plan or freeze the plan. Listen, if we're in May, usually these plans are written with a 1,000 hour requirement, right? I've got to work 1,000 hours in the year to be eligible to receive a contribution. What we see sometimes is a small business owner freezes the plan in May because his full-time workers or her full-time workers are going to hit 1,000 hours by June 30th, right? So if I freeze the plan before anyone accumulates 1,000 hours, I can avoid the funding liability for that year. So, I mean, there are strategies under the hood for helping manage some of the volatility that comes in revenue, cyclical revenue. But, these plans are for people that can have some predictable revenue over the foreseeable 3 to 5 years or longer.
This is why you have a great TPA, because your third-party administration team can help you navigate these different scenarios, these different things that may pop up.
Yeah.
And I don't want to push people away from this as a solution because it can be a great solution. But like everything else, there are pros and there are cons to setting up a particular style plan to meet these other needs that you have. So just understanding that when you set up a cash balance plan, there is a semblance of permanence that needs to be put into the equation. You need to understand that there are funding requirements that you are going to have to make in order to keep it as a viable option for your business or your practice or, whatever field that you're in. So great conversation, Thad. I think, for those folks that are listening in that haven't thought about this before, explore it. It could be a great option. For those of you that are listening that are looking for ways to mitigate your tax liability, this is a great opportunity to explore this and take a look at this idea. And I can speak, I think, for both of us and say that we'd be happy to help you explore those options and help you make the right decision for your business and what you do. And I'm also going to say this, guys, like I do on every single call we have these topics, always make sure that you are consulting the proper professionals when going to make a decision on this. So if you are looking to mitigate taxes, make sure you're taking the time to review this with your tax professional. They're the ones that know your situation. They know what liabilities you owe to the IRS, and they know the calculations and things that will help you mitigate that. And then from there, that's when you can bring your professional retirement plan team, your TPA, your advisor, to come in and sit down and go over what that option looks like for you and if it will be a good fit for your business.
Yep.
Dad, did you want to add anything else to the conversation before we call it a day?
I think it's perfect as it is, Mike.
Well, I appreciate you, sir. I always enjoy our time out here. For those of you listening, I hope that once again, this is another 401 conversation that has brought value to you, maybe brought you a new idea that you can implement and put into use to help you solve a myriad of problems for yourself and for your business, or just in general, help you upsize those retirement savings. So Thad, thanks again. And we will catch you on the next edition of 401 Conversations.
Good seeing you, Mike.